Idly ho there, neighbours. Hope everyone's well, and life is treating you well. Sorry, it's been a bit of a spell since I put up an episode. I've been having some health issues, but I'm working on them, so we'll see how that comes out. I've got a LARP coming up this weekend, and I will confess I feel a certain amount of panic at being at a LARP after so long. It's kind of weird social situation, but should be interesting. Anyways, what I'm going to talk about tonight is I make appearances on this show called Appendix N. It's part of the Tome Show network of shows, and Jeffrey Wynn and Jeff Wickstrom. They go through all the books in the Appendix N, listed in the original Dungeon Master's Guide that Gary Gygax listed as sort of references to his idea of what the fantasy should be. They were his influences. Recently, and this hasn't gone up yet, but it will eventually, I helped record an episode about, among other things, Manly Wade Wellman. Now, many of the people watching this will probably have never heard of the guy. Certainly never read anything by him. Which is weird, because he's, at least stats-wise, kind of amazing. He was nominated for a Pulitzer for actually some nonfiction. He, it won the Ellery Queen Award over some rather well-respected writers. He won a number of other awards. He worked with the U.S. government in helping to preserve Appalachian folk tales. He was, a very successful writer in a lot of ways. He helped write for Superman. He helped create and write the character of Shazam or Captain Marvel, depending on how you which name you want to use at this point. And testified in a trial about the fact that he was told to basically make Superman. He was around and did a lot of cool stuff, but we don't have as much record of him as far as, it's not like Lovecraft or Robert E. Howard, where their creations lived well beyond the writers. The most of the writing that that Manly Wade Wellman did, I bet if I asked 100 typical gamers or fantasy fans, maybe 2 or 3 might be able to name 1 or 2. And that's, it's kind of sad that any, artist gets lost and forgotten that way. But there's a lot of pulp that got forgotten. The reason I bring this up in ostensibly a gaming podcast, beyond the fact that he was an influence on Gary Gygax, is sometimes you're at a loss to find inspiration for your games. A lot of people will turn to popular novels for their inspiration. The problem with this is you always run into the problem of people who know that content as well or better than you, and feel that you're doing it wrong because you're not doing it the way that writer did it, or how they perceive how that writer did it. You can run a Lord of the Rings game, but some people will always have a problem with the fact that it's not true to canon to Tolkien. It will bug them. Star Wars, similar sort of problem. So, and again, Conan's another good one, where you could run into that. So one of the things you can do is there are a lot of actually really good writers that most people have never read. I was going through some old stuff at my grandparents' old place. My grandparents are dead, which is sad, but I found this. Now, on the cover it lists, and let me see if I can get it close enough for you. Simak, Van Vo, Leinster, D, and Williams. Now, you might have heard of some of these. A.E. Van Vo, this guy did The Lensman. Is that right? No, that's not right. Anyway, A.E. Van Vo is one of the classic science fiction writers. Let's see, Clifford Simak, one of the greats. I mean, these are people who are considered classics in a number of these writers, and some of them you've never heard of. Which means that if you want to take a story that's written by one of these, lesser-known writers, and turn it into an adventure idea or a world idea or something like that, you're going to run into less friction with people's expectations because they won't have read it. They won't have heard of it. And it's just a thing that I was thinking of today while looking through some old lesser-known books that happen to be on the shelf. Maybe it'll jog some ideas for you. Also, going back and reading some of these lost works actually is kind of fun. I had heard of Manly Wade Wellman through my godfather, a guy named Carl Edward Wagner. Also a not widely known fantasy and horror writer. But Manly Wade Wellman was an influence on him. And so I had heard of him, but I hadn't read a lot of his stuff. Just a few stories here and there. And I started trying to dig out more of his stories and read them. And they're interesting, and it's fascinating to read those stories, and it's good to see why people liked him. I can also understand why people forgot him. For the most part. There are some people who are always going to remember, the obscure people that were awesome to those few people who knew about them. One of the reasons he was forgotten is he was really good at writing stories, but he wasn't coming up with new ideas of stories, new ways of doing stories. He was just really good at writing those ideas down. Like, he doesn't come up with a Conan. He doesn't come up with a Lovecraftian mythos. But he writes stories that sort of fit in that mold, and he writes them in many ways better than the original writers did. But it lacked that shock of originality. I think that's certainly part of why he wasn't as well known. Anyway, that's my ramble for tonight. I hope everyone's having a good evening, and I will be back when I can. Subscribe, like, share with all the people, and stay out of trouble. Especially you. Specifically talking to you. No, not the one behind you. You. That's what I'm saying. It's all about you. But your suspicions were correct. It is all about